Hello everyone, welcome again to the channel. Today I want to share with you this story. The story says, in Kiev, Senator Blumenthal says he hopes to see a hand-to-hand insurgency in Russian-occupied Ukraine. So let's get to the article to highlight a few things. So there in Ukraine, it was Senator Richard Blumenthal and Lindsey Graham, and they said this, which is a very strange statement. Says long-range artillery is very important, but so is the hand-to-hand insurgency that we are hoping to see in eastern Ukraine, in the territory that's already been occupied by the Russians, says Blumenthal. Both Blumenthal and Graham voiced support for an insurgency in eastern Ukraine. The main purpose of the visit was to discuss a plan to designate Russia as a state sponsor of terrorism. So, talking about irony here, says Blumenthal said the U.S. should send HIMARS rocket systems with longer ranges than they already provided, and more Harpoon anti-ship missiles and air defense systems. Okay, so we know that as far as weapons are concerned, we have already mentioned that in the channel several times. But what is interesting in a very negative way is this whole thing, this whole scheme, which we will go into a little bit more detail. So first is the fact that they say we're hoping to see in eastern Ukraine hand-to-hand insurgency. Based on what? How are they kind of having this kind of hope? Where is the hope coming from? Well, we know where the hope is to see an insurgency is coming from. The US is very active funding insurgency everywhere in the world. They did it so many times, it's probably difficult to keep count of those. But against Russia, they did it already at least one time, directly when they were funding insurgents in Afghanistan. Now when they are fighting against them, they are called terrorists. Very conveniently, they relabel them. Before they were freedom fighters because they were fighting against the Russians. Then when they go and fight against them, they become terrorists. So this is important for the next reason that they just mentioned here, that they are willing to label Russia as a state sponsor of terrorism. And that is very cynical, very hypocritical, because the biggest state sponsor of terrorism in the world is the United States. That is demonstrated already. And they already stated what are their goals. They are going to do anything and everything they want to create some kind of insurgency in Ukraine, and they are going to fund it with money and weapons as they usually do. So what is this whole thing about trying to designate Russia as a state sponsor of terrorism? So let's get a little bit more into what this means. What this means is more like symbolic. They just say that certain country, is a state sponsor of terrorism, and they say it's a list they have, and what it means is that people or countries in this list have some sanctions, and which countries are in the list is Cuba, Iran, North Korea, and Syria. And they're planning to do this thing with Russia. So let's go into detail about the different sanctions. I will not read to you all the sanctions. Most of the sanctions don't apply to Russia, in my opinion, like ban on arms related exports and sales. Russia doesn't buy weapons, so this doesn't apply. Everything else doesn't apply, but this one does. It says control over exports of dual use items requiring a 30-day congressional notification for goods or services that could significantly enhance the terrorist list countries' military capability or ability to support terrorism. So this is basically a way to enforce more sanctions on exports. And already a few times, I think, the government of Russia said that they will react in a negative way to this move from the United States, because it's first of all, it's a sham. It's just some reputational scheme to say, oh, this state is doing some terrorist activities. But other than this, I don't see how it's going to affect Russia, because they already banned a lot of things. What this will mean is that they will try to enforce exports controls through other countries as well. And this includes also sanctions on people who try to circumvent the sanctions, and I think even criminal charges against them. So if you are some individual that is supporting a country or an organization in a country that is being targeted as a state sponsor of terrorism, I think there are even criminal consequences for people. So, like I said already, Russia said that they were not going to react in a positive way to this. So I already mentioned a few times a few ways in which Russia can retaliate to this kind of activities from the United States and their allies. So I think that a very easy way to retaliate will be with rare earths, which the United States has always having some problems. Rare earths are currently produced mainly in China and a few other countries, and some of the rare earths are also exported from Russia. So like I mentioned this already in a previous article, so I will just highlight a few things. For example, Russia is having a highly sought mineral that is called antimony, and this is used to produce ammunition and other military equipment. It's even used on bullets, explosives, nuclear weapons, and many other things. And basically, both Russia and China are one of the main producers in the world for this. So the US is trying to get this sold, but there is no easy way for this, for different reasons. One of them is that it is more expensive to produce it in other countries, so that's why China and Russia are producing it. And this is also source of concern for the United States, because they never sanctioned a country that was so rich in minerals like Russia, and they plan to do the same kind of things with China and Russia, so this is not going to improve for them. Another one is the thing about cadmium. What they say is that basically the main source of minerals that is used to produce fertilizer contains cadmium. So in the EU there is a regulation because they want to limit the content of cadmium, And why is this? Because cadmium is a heavy metal and is associated with cancer, kidney failure, bone disease, and currently they are trying to reduce the content of cadmium in the phosphate that they import to produce fertilizer. And apparently the phosphate that they get imported from Morocco is having some problems because it's very high in cadmium, so they don't want to work more with this kind of phosphate. And then you see the top exporters of phosphate rock were Morocco and Russia, and they don't want the phosphate from Morocco. So the second largest is Russia. So Russia can retaliate easily by forbidding exports of phosphate. I think also Belarus is a high exporter of this, but there is a current trend in Russia that they don't want to export anymore just the raw mineral. They want to export a finished product in the form of fertilizer, and this will increase the prices for fertilizer around the world, but especially for the EU. They say that they have some sort of phosphate in Finland, but it's not a lot. And this is pay attention to this article is from 2018, so this has been a prevalent situation, and they even mentioned that this is kind of a situation that lends itself to political blackmail, and they even mentioned that sanctions could impact this, and they were talking about this since 2018. So it is very, very interesting how they are always concerned about this, but they still continue to do the things that will damage their own economies, So that is the dilemma that now faces both the United States and European Union. They are shooting themselves in the foot. Is like these boomerang sanctions. They were planning to create a crisis in Russia to overthrow the government, and the one who lost the political position was Boris Johnson. So they have everything backwards. It's not going according to their plans. And apart from that, we have the thing about the noble gases. If you remember, there was a move which Taiwan, the world's leading producer of chips, imposed curbs on exports. So basically banned. They created an embargo on export of computer chips to Russia. And then in retaliation, Russia said, okay, we're not going to export these noble gases that are used to produce chips. I already mentioned this in a previous video where Russia was forced to invest heavily in developing their own local chip manufacturing industry. It's going to take a while. It's not going to happen immediately, but it's something that they need to do anyway. And interestingly enough, Ukraine was also one of the world's largest suppliers of noble gases until it suspended production at its plants in the cities of Mariupol and Odessa. Both of those cities are currently in the site for Russian military operation. It is speculated that also Odessa will fall under Russian control sooner or later. Mariupol is already under Russian control. So these are all sources of retaliation that the Russian Federation can implement. And let's not forget that China and Russia are already allies. So they are working together. So if they jointly decide to curb or even limit exports of these, or just declare an embargo on all these materials to the United States and their allies, this will create a big disruption for the economies, because these rare earth minerals are not only used for everything electronic, but also for weapon systems. And the United States has some reserves, but they don't use them because of environmental regulations. So what it means is that it's very expensive to produce them there. So again, is this domino effect, If they produce them, then everything they produce will be even higher price, and that higher price will trigger higher prices somewhere else. So it's highly consequential, and all stems from this whole thing, that they want to designate Russia as state sponsor of terrorism. But these are the possible implications of this. And just to highlight once more, the whole scheme is so hypocritical, because the higher state sponsor of terrorism in the world is the United States. So that's my opinion. Let me know what you think. And as always, I ask you to please like this video, share it in social media, and subscribe to the channel. I hope to see you again very soon. Thank you for watching.